Welcome back, everybody, to episode 12 of season 4, Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality. Today, we're talking about capitalism and the greatest commandment. I'm Christian A. Smith. I'm the host. I'm the heretic. I'm glad you're here. Shout out to everybody in our Patreon community who's with us live right now in real time. Thank you for supporting this movement. You all make this possible, so we really appreciate you. And then to those who are listening on the podcast platforms, thank you so much for continuing to listen. Please share. If you're on Apple, please leave a review. We really appreciate it. I have some of my favorite people here today, all ministers of the faith community. We got the TFC minister rostrum today. So we're going to get into some introductions here in a moment. But before we go forward, we do have to give you the one rule. It is a necessity that we give you the one rule. And today, Miss Tyranny AT&T, all the things Jordan is going to do it. Come on, AT&T, give us our one rule.
Hello, friends. So we have one rule here at Holy Smokes, and that one rule is that we honor each other's lived experiences.
You gotta say it again now.
I was about to say, where y'all at? The one rule at Holy Smokes is that we honor each other's lived experiences.
One more time
For the Holy Ghost. The one rule is that we honor each other's lived experiences and that we don't uplift theories over what people have actually lived. We want to make sure that we have kindness in all of our healthy debates. And this one rule is rooted in Greatest Commandment Theology, which Christian curated. You should buy the book if you have not. And Greatest Commandment Theology says that your love for God is displayed through how you love your neighbor, which is an extension of how you love yourself. Therefore, you can't fully love God if you don't love your neighbor, and you can't fully love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. And that's based off of Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40, if you want to go check that out in the Bible. And you can buy Christian's book on his website at christianasmith.com. Because, I mean, how can you be listening to Holy Smokes if you haven't read Breaking All the Rules? Like, come on. Anyways, that's the one rule.
Thank you so much.
Survey says.
All right. Shout out to Steve Harvey with the guest appearance.
Sorry, y'all. Let me say to turn the music down.
It gave it a dynamic feeling. It was just like the one rule.
Like we had a live.
The one answer is.
We had a live studio audience today.
Right? We got a big budget bump. We got Steve Harvey up in here.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for that one rule, T. Now we're going to get into some introductions here. And today, by way of introduction, tell us, what are you smoking and or drinking? And here's the question that I want to pose to those of us who are here today on the cast and those who are in the live virtual audience. What does excessive wealth look like to you? What does excessive wealth look like to you? And that's in line with the conversation that we're having today about capitalism and the greatest commandment. So I want to start with Myron the Mystic. Myron, tell us, what are you smoking and or drinking? And let us know, what does excessive wealth look like to you?
Well, good evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you listen to this podcast, in the words of Karima. I am Myron the Mystic. And honestly, I'm not drinking anything really major. I'm drinking the Lord's vodka here, right? Some El Shaddai, some water. There we go. I figured it needed a name, so I'm drinking this El Shaddai here. Not smoking because I'm inside, because the weather's kind of wonky outside. And what does excessive wealth look like? I remember a couple years ago, there was a gentleman that ran for president. And one of the things that came out about this guy is that he had an elevator built for his vehicles. I think that's excessive wealth. You got so many cars that you need an elevator to get your cars from one level to the other level of your garage, because your garage has multi-levels.
Wow. Yeah, that is serious.
Serious.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's kick it over to Grayson. Grayson, what are you smoking and or drinking, if anything? And what does excessive wealth look like to you?
The mirror. I'm just kidding.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
I am not smoking anything. I am in Pam Hester's house, so there will be none of that happening here. And I too am just drinking some Jesus gin, enjoying it thoroughly. And what excessive wealth looks like to me is billionaires hating poor people so much they can't even stand to share the same planet with them. Saying that they would rather play space pirate, they would rather play astronaut like a 5-year-old at a birthday party, rather than give up like 0.01% of their wealth to actually help people, and instead just pull a big old deuces and just leave the atmosphere and then have the audacity to come back.
Oh!
I do need to say though, when I did the curvance, oh, my mom texted me and she goes, "Are you okay?" she's upstairs, and she was like, "Okay."
Yes, Pam, he's fine. He's okay. He's okay. All right. So Grayson just went straight at the billionaires going to space. Let's see what Tierney has to say about that. AT&T, what you got?
Hello, I'm Tierney, AT&T, all the things, because that's what I be doing out here. I'm not smoking or drinking anything. In a similar vein as Grayson, I'm at my in-laws' house, and neither of those things is permissible inside these here walls. So I
Tell the truth.
I am just here to offer my insight. Grayson stole my what does capitalism look like, but I do have two.
Listen, I stay doing that.
Yes, you stay still in my points, but I had two things that I want to read in the same vein, so we're just gonna double down on the Bezos and how he should not be out in the space being trashed. Okay, so fun facts, not so fun. $2.75 is how much Amazon workers made while Jeff Bezos was floating in the air for 11 minutes. So think about that. While he made on average $1,570,000 during those same 11 minutes that he was swirling around in the air. So 275 versus $1,570,000. I mean, okay.
Yikes. Cool.
And he was probably allowed to take bathroom breaks up there.
You know?
The shots fired? Oh! Man. Wow. Okay, this is how it's going today. All right. And I think we have some more shots fired here in the comments. So Blakey Cubano, he said excessive wealth looks like the Rothschild family, the Bush family, the royal family, etc. So he went directly at individuals and families, as did Tierney and Grayson and Myron. I like what Courtney has to say. Courtney Warren, one of our newest patrons, he said excessive wealth. He went straight to the Bible. It looks like building a barn for the excess and not sharing with others. Boom, mic drop. I was about to say, I know I didn't say any big words. So that I love that, Courtney, and I'm actually going to steal it. So by way of introduction, I'm the only one smoking today. And since it's the last episode of the season, I decided I'm going to have one of my favorite sticks to go out with a bang. So I'm having the Plasencia Alma Fuerte, one of my favorite sticks. And I'm having one of my favorite bourbons, that Colonel E.H. Taylor small batch. Oh, this is some good stuff right here. It's some good stuff. And it's kind of a unicorn. You can't find it everywhere. So I was like thrilled to find it at my local shop. So I agree with Courtney, like, because excessive wealth is relative, in my opinion. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit more later on as we get into this. But I believe when it gets to a point where you hoard so much money that you could never use in a lifetime. And like your kids, your grandkids are covered for life, and you're still hoarding more money while other people are living in poverty and going hungry and dying of starvation. That's what excessive wealth looks like to me, which is relative, of course. And that's what we'll get into. So, okay. Myra, you look like you got something to say.
I do, but we got protocol. Can we revisit that right after we get to where we got to go?
All right. Now, just go ahead. Just say it right now.
Because I think that's brilliant. Because what I think I've discovered is that God is not against consumption. I think God is against abundance, or hoarding, I should say, excessiveness, right? Because we always see Jesus in situations where people are consuming things, and they're consuming things until they're full. But we always see Jesus condemning access, right?
Yes.
Because when we start hoarding stuff is when we start taking the aim at everybody else. Think about the beginning of the pandemic, right? When everybody got scared and that whole scarcity mentality came into place, and we started hoarding paper towels and hoarding toilet tissue. We started taking aim at other people because of hoarding objects and hoarding things. And I think that's what excessive wealth does. It causes us to flip on the greatest commandment and start taking aim at one another, as opposed to being conciliatory to one another. So that's all I got. Okay.
We're not going to hit them for conciliatory, really?
No, we're not, because we're not. We forgot about it. Let's move on. Late. It was too late.
So who just said that? Jonathan in the chat said it. Hoarding gasoline. I was just thinking about that. We created a gas shortage in Georgia when there really wasn't one, because everybody went out and they were filling up their tanks and topping them off when they didn't need to. And then you had all of these crazy people filling up all of these like bins and jugs with gasoline. You had some idiots out there filling up plastic bags with gasoline. And then you got other people who can't even put gas in their tank when they really need it. That's excessive. That's excessive. So we'll get in all of that. We'll get in all of that. But first, this is Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality. And although I'm the only person smoking today, we do have a cigar tip for you. And it's coming from Myron the Mystic. So we're going to go ahead and get into the Mystic's cigar moment. Give him his music.
Hey, folks, it's time for a cigar tip. Let me tell you, this is a tip that I am still learning to this day. Let me take you back about 7-8 years when I first started smoking cigars. I was in my backyard. I was manning the grill. I had my tongs, I had my straw hat on. I had on my, grilling outfit as I was cooking some pork chops, some heritage pork chops. They were beautiful. If you don't eat the pork, don't come for me. I'll take yours. I was out there grilling, having a good time. I had a double Corona, which is the largest size cigar you can have. And I was smoking this cigar. I was determined I was going to smoke this cigar. And really, folks, it was not a great experience. It was a gruesome one, because I started smoking that cigar in my Jesus sandals. I sure did have my Jesus sandals. Y'all see me work the grill. I go all out. Smoking this cigar. Next thing you know, my head started to spin a little bit, but I kept on smoking because I was determined I was going to finish this cigar. Smoked a little bit, then my stomach started to get uneasy, but I kept on smoking because I was determined I was going to smoke this cigar. The next thing you know, I threw up all over the backyard because I was determined I was going to smoke this cigar. Here is the tip. You don't have to smoke the whole cigar.
Amen.
You want your experience to be enjoyable. You want to have a good time. If you feel a little queasy, stop. If your head starts to spin, stop. Just smoke a little, smoke a lot. You don't have to smoke the whole thing. The experience is supposed to be enjoyable. I didn't eat anything. I was just out there smoking, drinking beers and grilling pork chops, and I threw up all over the backyard. Don't let that be your experience. You don't have to smoke the whole thing. That's my tip to all those cigar smokers out there.
That is a great tip that we need to hear from time to time.
It's also a great answer. It's the same thing he said for the excess wealth answer. Just have a little bit, and if you have too much, it ruins it for everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go ahead and kind of dovetail off of what he said, because I know how people think. You know, I'm the heretic, so I get all the backlash on social media. Anybody who's been connected to me longer than a week knows I get a lot of backlash. So I know how people think. And somebody saying, see, that's why y'all shouldn't be smoking them cigars, because you get sick and you throw up all over the place. Yeah, if you overdo it, that will happen. The same way, if you overeat, you will throw up all over the place. Yep. So everything in moderation. You don't want to do anything that will ultimately cause harm to you. So if you do smoke a cigar, do it in moderation. Do it in a way that's enjoyable, that doesn't cause harm to you and have you throwing up all over the grill.
Exactly. Not the grill, the backyard. I didn't mess up the pork chops. Now, good God. That would have been a tragedy. Jesus Christ. No.
You weren't trying to cook puke chops.
No, not at all. Whew. No, that was heritage pork. I bought that from home.
Puke chops. Oh God. Grayson Leviticus Hester. And as Blake said, you know, that swine is so divine, so you can't throw up on the pork chops. Yes.
Whole Foods, folks. Those pork chops.
Oh yeah, those were expensive. Absolutely. Okay. Capitalism and the greatest commandment. This was one of those topics that we talked about before this season. Like, ooh, this one's going to be heavy. And when we talked about what episodes were we looking forward to this season, a lot of people said they were looking forward to this episode, because as soon as we threw the title out there, some people felt exposed. Like the idea of, like, we're going to come in here and say, you shouldn't make a lot of money, because that's not greatest commandment, right? So I'm looking forward to getting into this discussion. Let me just lay out real quick, like briefly, what capitalism is, because it's an entire economic system. I can't get into all the nuts and bolts and all the nuances of capitalism, but it's credited, I believe, to Adam Smith, who was a man from Scotland who was an economist back in like the 18th century. And he wrote this 1,000-page document on how economies could function differently than how they had been functioning, where the government controlled everything. And he figured if we allow for open markets, free trade, allow the markets to be controlled by private citizens, he theorized that would actually benefit all of society, because his theory was, even if somebody gets into a business for personal gain, as they make more and more wealth, even though they were doing it for personal gain, they're eventually going to push that back out into the economy. And ultimately, everybody is going to win. And the government doesn't need to control how everybody makes money. And he did a lot to push back against governments that were controlling the flow of money and business in their countries. So that's what capitalism is at its core. It looks a lot different in, you know, the U.S. economy today, because as we've seen, there are definitely people who have taken advantage of the open market, private market, and they're doing all these, you know, different activities and making a lot of money. And what we're seeing in American capitalism, and I'm sure in other countries too, but we're here in America. So what we're seeing in American capitalism is that people are taking advantage of the system, but they're not sharing or spreading the wealth. They're hoarding the wealth. So that's capitalism in a nutshell. Will anybody add anything to that? You think anything that's really important that I missed that you want to add in? Okay, cool. Well, then we're good. So that's capitalism. Now, there are all types of economic systems. We are not economists, so we're not going to have all the answers. We're theologians, we're preachers. We just really believe in the greatest commandment, and we think it should influence how we engage all of life, not just spirituality. We think greatest commandment should also influence how we engage politics, how we engage economics, so on and so forth. Grayson, what you got?
I think it would be good just to define what capital is, because if it's capitalism, what is the ideology based off of this thing called capital?
Do you want to address that, or you putting that?
You don't need to do the research.
Oh, well, as I see it, because I use, so capital is basically your finances, the money that you make and that you use to build whatever business or enterprise that you are that you're building. So that's capital in a nutshell. It's money, right? It's about making or generating as much money as you possibly can. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and just get into it. We've already shared what excessive wealth looks like, especially in this context of capitalism. So I want to start here. In what ways, if any, do you think components of capitalism align with the greatest commandment? So I want to start with AT&T, and I want to hear what you have to say. Do you think capitalism in any way can align with the greatest commandment, T?
Yay, you're starting with me. Okay. So as I was thinking about this to prepare for the episode, the thing that came up for me in a possible way that the greatest commandment could align with capitalism is how at the end of the value proposition, we talk about living our most abundant life, or in the most abundant way possible, right? And so one of the benefits of capitalism, if it's done correctly, is that you have enough money to sustain yourself. You have enough money to take care of yourself. You can have generational wealth in a way that doesn't hoard that money or hoard that property or those assets and things like that. And so when I think about greatest commandment theology, I'm not harming my neighbor or harming myself or harming God by making sure that me and my family are taken care of. I think that you can get to a place where you go over and above and beyond what that line is. But I think if it's done in moderation and with good intentions and in an ethical way, then living that life of abundance, or the most abundant way possible to be here financially, those two things can line up. I think when you get to the hoarding and the greed and the gluttony, that's when we are outside of the confines of the greatest commandment. But I think if it's done in an ethical and a moral way, living a life of abundance and capitalism can go hand in hand.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Blakey Cubano, he mentioned Gaddafi, the former, or the slain president of Libya. And he said his economic ideas are ones that he actually agrees with most, which is a hot take, because if you pay attention to the way American culture tells the story of Gaddafi, he was a dictator, a tyrant, a killer, so on and so forth. I'm not here to argue one side or the other. I haven't done enough research. But what I do know about the way America teaches history is that we do tend to spew the facts. We do tend to twist the facts many times. So while I'm not saying that Gaddafi is this saint, I'm also going to say I'm not sure if I believe everything the American propaganda system said about him. So that I'm going to just throw that out there. So, Grayson, do you think capitalism in any way can align with greatest commandment?
I think it could if it wasn't so conjoined with and birthed alongside racism.
Ooh.
Max Kendi calls them. I did it again.
I love it. That was good.
Brittany, free her, by the way. So I think Ibram X. Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist calls them something like the terrible twins or the caustic cousins. I forget what he said, but it's essentially he's making the point that capitalism and racism developed simultaneously and provided the logic for the other to continue. Because the person you mentioned is a Westerner. It was because of the Industrial Revolution, which is sort of where industrial capitalism becomes the ideology of the UK, and then to support both the increase in output that then created an increase in demand that then demanded more of output, sent the Brits all over the world, 80% of it colonizing and Christianizing, quote unquote. That capitalism then agreed that racism was created to justify. So I think that while there can be elements to capitalism that can honor the individual, which is a very Western notion that it is about the individual in and of themselves. And I think that can be very powerful because we don't want to lose the imago Dei, the image within us. I think the fact that the root of it is an inherently dehumanizing, for the purposes of dehumanization, ideology, I just think like it can't. It's incapable.
Yo, you just said some good stuff. My favorite part was capitalism created a greed that racism was created to justify. That was good. That was good, Sparkle. That was.
I haven't been called that one in a while. Thank you.
Pamela called you that in the live audience, so I had to go ahead and reiterate. That was good. That man, yeah, absolutely. Myron, what you got?
You know, my brother Tim Carruthers says, if you never hear somebody say, "I don't know," don't trust them. And so, honestly, I don't know. Now, I've got thoughts, but I don't have anything concrete here. The first thing I need to point out, though, is that Jesus existed before capitalism existed.
Yes.
And that we have got to be careful. And I say this as a true critique, having been a part of the Word of Faith Prosperity Gospel movement, right? I went to undergrad in the middle of it. I know every televangelist you name. I know them all by name. I know their children. I probably got their number in my cell phone. Yeah, you know, one televangelist, who shall remain nameless, calls me every year to come to a conference that they put on. Right? Mm-hmm. And gives me a seat right on the front row. So I know them all. And have relationship with them. So here's what we can't do. We can't read Jesus's teachings through capitalist lenses and use them to justify our avarice and our greed. I keep thinking avarice means greed. Avarice means greed. Said it 3 times. Avarice means greed.
But we caught you before you said it. Like you saw our facial expressions, and then you fixed it. So
I just want you to know I've used the word avarice.
We don't remember
this season. So I mean, go listen to the other episodes, and you'll be good to go. Here we go. So we can't use the just. We did a teaching at the Faith Community on Saturday where we talked about the parable of the talents. And we talked about the fact that most people look at that through capitalist lenses, and that Jesus is commanding us to go out and make some interest off of the money that he has given us. But that's not necessarily the case. We cannot kind of reinterpret the scriptures through capitalist lenses. So that I don't know if capitalism and Christianity are compatible. But what I do know is that we can't read it through capitalism.
Agreed. And I want to make one adjustment, because you said capitalism and Christianity, and the way Christianity is practiced by most churches in the United States. I think capitalism and Christianity do align based on how you practice it. But greatest commandment to me is just a different category. It's a subcategory of Christianity, because I'm not denouncing my Christianity, but like I tell people, I'm a greatest commandment Christian. Like, so I just see things a little bit different. But we've seen how capitalism plays out in many of our Christian churches, like what you just talked about, in many ways with the prosperity movement. You gonna add something?
I want to answer Courtney's question, right? He talked about the Greeks and capitalism. It wasn't named capitalism. So they had this early form of capitalism that was kind of a free market type of economy, the Greeks, but it was not capitalism per se. Right. As a named institution, it wasn't capitalism. But with that being said, I think one of the things that Jesus does do is he critiques whatever the Greeks practiced. One more comment. I'm monopolizing the time here.
Go ahead.
You know, people call Jesus a revolutionary, and I don't think he was that. A revolutionary comes in and creates change immediately, causes an uprising of the people. Jesus wasn't a revolutionary. He was a subversionist, which means that he tried to institute things in a subversive way, right?
He was explaining it.
I was getting there.
He was explaining it.
Listen, capitalism is this goddamn dollar jar. That's capitalism. I'm an education. Shit, I'm gonna be broke. So Jesus comes and tries to subvert, to undertow these principles, right? He's attacking them from the inside out. And what I think Jesus does teach us is that one of the things that we as Christians can do is we can go into a system and use the system to subvert the system so that ultimately God can get the glory from the system. And I think that's illustrated to us in one of the parables that he gives, but I'll come back to that parable in a minute. Go ahead.
That's good. I really appreciate that. And yeah, so to think about what the Greeks practice, you know, like Myron said, it was capitalism-esque or capitalism-ish. But what we find the beginning of what we experience as capitalism in the 18th century, right? It even goes back to, you know, how we have factories now where there's like an assembly line. That is a result of capitalism as we know it. Like prior to Adam Smith and his write-up on how to have a capitalistic economy, you had artisans who would create an item from beginning to end. So one example that was used was like a pen factory. You would have like 20 different people who all made pens from start to finish. And he noticed that with that type of setup, your output was limited. So the money you can make was limited. He said, what if we created an assembly line and have each person specialize in one particular area of that pen? And then now you can exponentially increase your amount of output, like in a major way. So he was saying, here's a way for us to actually increase production capacity, which will increase wealth, which will then spread it to more of society rather than the government controlling it. So that was like the concept he was coming at. For me, with capitalism aligning with the greatest commandment, I think the place where it aligns for me at its core, not what we practice today, but at its core is the idea that individuals are allowed to generate as much revenue as they're able to generate. Now, I'm not talking about keeping the revenue. I'm saying generate the revenue. Some people are more gifted in areas that allow them to generate certain amounts of revenue. That's just a fact of life, because the markets determine what is valuable. The markets determine what people want and how much of it they want. So if you're gifted in an area that allows you to generate that revenue, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see any contradiction to the greatest commandment, because the core of the greatest commandment is to love yourself. So if I am doing something that makes me come alive and it allows me to generate a lot of revenue, I don't see any problem with that. If at some point in my life, I'm able to generate billions of dollars, guess what? I am going to generate billions of dollars. But where I draw the line is I'm not going to hoard what I generate. And I got to constantly go back to that, because that's where you get into love your neighbor as yourself. So yes, I love myself, but in loving myself, I also love my neighbor. So if everything that I need is taken care of and I get to experience a lot of my wants, I think the problem with capitalism as we experience it today is people just keep going and going and going. And when they have satisfied everything that they want, they imagine something else to want. So we talked about the billionaires who went into space. It was like, having everything on Earth wasn't enough. Now we got to go conquer space, while people on Earth are still hungry, are still starving, are still homeless. That is where I tend to draw the line. Although I think capitalism and the greatest commandment can coexist when done properly. I got one.
Done. That was nicely done, man.
I got one. Grayson, you were gonna say something? Oh, I thought you were. Okay, no problem. So, Myron?
I can pop back in here.
Yeah,
I think the critique that we need to be careful with is I think hoarding creates blindness. And we don't see our neighbor when we start hoarding things. The parable I was just talking about, and I don't know if it's a parable, I don't know if it's a true story. Jesus tells the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man is got all this wealth that he has hoarded. Lazarus is a beggar that is sitting outside of the rich man's gate. And the parable ends with the rich man going to hell and the poor man going up to heaven. If you look at that parable, this rich man does nothing to actively antagonize or actively hurt Lazarus. The problem is that the rich man just doesn't see Lazarus because he's cut off. His line of sight is cut off because of all the stuff that he has. And I think when we start hoarding things, we start getting blind to the people who are right outside of our door. And then we'll start to pay the consequences for that. And ultimately, we get a broken down society because we're blind to the problems that we see. I think, Tyranny, you referenced it. Jeff Bezos comes back from space and goes, thank you to all the workers at Amazon that paid for this.
And the clients.
And the clients that paid for this, right? While there's somebody that works at Amazon that can't feed their family, but yet they're paying for you to go swirl around in the sky. So.
Which then begs the question, like, what part do we play in it? Which then gets really fuzzy, right? Because I use Amazon. I'm a Prime member, right? So am I contributing to it? Sometimes that's the struggle. And where I struggle is a lot of times, because I know people are thinking that. And even in the comments right now, like, Cody, the professional, he said, so he Bezos can't go to space and feed the hungry. I totally think he could, but he doesn't. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. If he is doing his part to spread the wealth and he goes to space, cool. Because guess what? He has enough money to do both. I actually did some of the math a while back, so I don't have the exact numbers, but looking at Bezos' wealth, he could end homelessness in the United States and still be a billionaire. He could end homelessness in the United States and still be a billionaire. So that's my problem with how we practice capitalism. Like, it can work, but it's not working. And that's the problem that I have. So I want to ask this, because I guess we already gotten into it. What are some ways that capitalism just doesn't jive with the greatest commandment? T, you want to jump on that? What ways does it not jive?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts that don't necessarily directly answer your question, but I'll get there. I feel like y'all all answered both of the questions, and I was trying to follow the outline and answer the first question and wait till you came back around to the second question.
You're right.
But I had two trains of thoughts. One of them was about Bezos, and so I think the thing about that whole situation that gets me is when you're in a place of hoarding wealth. That when we went into the pandemic, Bezos was one of the only billionaires in America. And now, since we've been out inside of the pandemic, we have an additional 9 billionaires in America that have accumulated this amount of wealth while the rest of us were on lockdown and inside, and people were trying to make sure that they could feed their families and going on food strikes and all these other things. And I think that's the part of capitalism that we have to look at and be like, well, does this truly align with the greatest commandment? And then as you're talking about Amazon and consumerism and how buying things on Amazon and having a Prime membership like plays into that role, plays into Bezos being more rich, plays into the people at Amazon not being able to form unions because we still spending our money on Prime, and like union busting and all these other things. I think it gets to a point where you have to talk about convenience, right? And so a lot of us don't want to cancel our Prime memberships because Amazon Prime is convenient. I can order something and it'll be at my house in 2 days. And so at what point does our convenience not, is our convenience not in alignment with greatest commandment as we think about our neighbors? They might not be our direct neighbors, but they're our extended neighbors. If you're thinking about the people who work at Amazon, if you're thinking about people who make minimum wage, who don't get restroom breaks, who are getting all these violations for trying to work this job to provide for their families, and the ways we're contributing to that by the Prime memberships and the things we buy on Amazon, I think that's when we have to question whether these two things can be true at the same time. It's like, well, how much am I feeding into this in a way that I just don't want to give up my convenience?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave it open in case somebody wants to jump on that, because I think it's a great question. No, nobody wants to respond. So I'll say this, T, because you bring up a great point, and then I'm gonna let Grayson jump in. I think the problem there is the way the convenience was created. Like, many of us took advantage of the convenience of Amazon before we had any idea how he was taking advantage of people to get to that point. Like, so we were already there. And I think, yes, there is a component of consumers taking some responsibility. I just wonder how much, because you really have one person at the head of all. If he changes his mind in any way, the whole system changes. And look, the convenience doesn't have to leave, because again, he's a multi-billionaire. And I mean, we're talking about him right now. He's just one example, because there are plenty of billionaires who hoard wealth, but we're talking about him because he's been in the news all week. But so it's like, if he made a change, we could maintain the convenience, his workers could get paid, society could be helped, and he'd still be super wealthy. So that's why I kind of push back sometimes with putting all of the onus on us. Like, oh, well, we're just taking advantage of the convenience. Yes, we are. We don't control what these people get paid, though. We don't control their working conditions. He does. And the people in power in his company, and the people in power who are making the billions, make those decisions. So, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm going to say my 2 cents and then I'm going to sit down. But I think this is where we get into a cyclical part of the conversation, right? Because if you don't buy from Amazon, Amazon exists no more. So if all of us make a conscious effort not to do that, then the people aren't able to make the money, but like that they're making in order to produce the billions and all of these types of things. So it's a cycle, right? So it's like, if I stop doing this, then the whole cycle will bust. But if he stops doing that, which I have no control over, I only have control over what it is that I'm doing, then it's like, we get into this cyclical conversation of, well, who should make the first move, right? And so I think that's like, it's the part of like, well, I can only control what I can control. And then you get into this whole cycle of like, who's doing what they're supposed to be doing and who's not doing what they're not supposed to be doing. But I could talk about this and theorize it all day. So Grayson, I'm just going to be quiet now.
Go ahead, Grayson.
So I think to the original question, in what ways does capitalism strike back against the greatest commandment, or clash against the greatest commandment? I think one element of capitalism is owning the means of production. So that's a primary facet of capitalism, meaning essentially that if you think about the Industrial Revolution, when Great Britain, London is, a few people who have the means to control the factories and control the markets, which then help control what people want and then what people are then producing to match the manufactured want. You have people who are able to essentially guide the quote invisible hand of the market, while everyone else just has to go into wage slavery, has to go into, well, you need to get a job because you need to eat. So people don't really have a choice not to work in a system that's created where like the goal is to own the means of production. So if people want to own the means of production, then just and gain the wealth that is at the core of it, then just don't let anyone else own the means of production. Let everyone else be the proletariat, who are the people who work for the bourgeoisie, who are the ones who...
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
You earned that.
Thank you, proletariat.
So in a Marxist way of looking at class struggle, the proletariat are people who don't own the means of production, who can't create the market, who can't guide the hand of the market, and are essentially slaves to it. So it's like whatever the bourgeoisie, where we get bougie from, who are the ones who have most, if not all of the resources, who have most, if not all of the means of production, which means able to create a reality that then other people are beholden to. Those are the two fundamental ways, like classes that are created. And so I think what is at like where there's a problem is that it rewards sociopathy, it rewards uncaringness, it rewards brutality, it rewards apathy, it rewards greed. Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. And that's why you have a Republican Party that still quotes a Russian author from the 30s named Ayn Rand, who created objectivism with capital O, which essentially states that altruism, being generous, is one of the lowest of human values, and greed and selfishness is one of the top values. And so that pursuing those to any degree is loving yourself. I'm not saying that's what I think. And so I think because you have a system that's like, provide for yourself, and then you'll get more of that, then it just essentially is saying, be greedy, and you'll get more to be greedy, because studies have shown that the more money you have, the less generous you're going to be. And people don't get wealthy by being generous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll say, one of the people I admire, and I'm sure, Grayson, you'll appreciate this, is Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton has made googly gobs of money, but she's constantly giving it away. I saw somebody make a post, and I don't know how factual this is, but I appreciate the heart of the post, that the only reason Dolly Parton isn't a billionaire is because of how much money she's giving away. So she could be if she would hoard it, because she's generated that much money, but she's constantly giving it away to help other people and spread the wealth. So to me, Dolly Parton is like an example of how capitalism could work if the players like are concerned with generosity rather than greed. So
I mean, you got me. I'm not going to argue against Dolly.
You can't argue against Dolly, right? You can't argue against Dolly, not at all.
She dressed up as a Playboy bunny for her husband. Did y'all see that? Oh, gave me my life. Anyway.
So here's my question, and this wasn't, I'm throwing this out there just based on the way the conversation is going. So where does the church stand in this? What are we supposed to do as people of faith who claim that we live by the greatest commandment? We espouse the greatest commandment. We teach it. Love God and how you love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yet we're in this greedy capitalistic economy where the wealthy get wealthier and the poor get poorer. What should our message be? What are we supposed to do with that? Myron?
You're brilliant, because that's where I think we should have went with this conversation. And if you didn't ask that, I was going to go there, because I'm not Bezos, right? I wish I was, but I'm not Bezos. I'm not Branson. I'm not Oprah. I'm not Dolly. So I don't have the wealth that they have. So how then do we exist in that system? That's why I go back to that idea of being subversive. And I think the message of Christ was subversive, that sometimes we've got to act within the system in order to create space for somebody else to come into the system to get what we need. Here it is. I was on a webinar today. I guess it was today. It was either today or yesterday. And it was about social media. I'm trying to learn how to be better at social media, right? Because I don't do shit on social media. Because I mean, I could care less, right?
Right.
And the comments on the webinar was, well, you know, the algorithms, they fight me. I post this and the algorithms don't cause people to see my stuff. And I'm shadow banned because of the algorithms. And the lady doing the webinar, this is what she said. I wrote this down, true story. She said, you know, your problem is you're fighting the algorithms. Don't fight the algorithms, leverage them. And I think that's ultimately what we've got to do with a capitalist society. Stop fighting it and leverage it. So get in there and create spaces where people who are less privileged have an opportunity to come in. So if I worked at Amazon, I would petition to create a maker space so that people who make homemade garments or homemade things have a platform to sell on Amazon so they can then enrich themselves through their community, right? Using localized things. Or I would do something of that nature. I would leverage the platform so that ultimately I can create space for somebody who's been marginalized out of it. So that's what I think we should do. I think we should operate in a subversive manner.
So leverage. Which I
thank y'all for that.
No, I understand to a certain degree. Like if you can't beat the system, then how do you leverage it? How do you subvert the system? Which is something that I always think about, especially with Black people who say everything is rigged, the system is rigged, I don't vote, I don't do any of that stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you're still a part of the system. Like, it's not like you live off the grid. You're still taking advantage of social services that are made available to you by the government that your peers vote on. Like, you're still taking advantage of all of that. So like some people are just woke for no reason. Like come on now. Like, if you're still gonna call 911 when your house is on fire, you're participating in the system.
If you're gonna go to the doctor when you get COVID, you're still participating in the system, even though you didn't take the vaccine.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, we live on stolen land in an illegitimate settler colonial state. So, like, no matter what. How deep do we go?
That's the challenge. And I talked about this in Breaking All the Rules, that if you get too bogged down into the far-reaching unintended consequences of your every action, you'll never be able to live. But because, like Cody said it in the comments a minute ago, like, if we go by the philosophy of don't shop with Amazon because of how they treat their employees, we wouldn't shop with any of these major companies that we use. We wouldn't buy Nike. We wouldn't buy anything. We wouldn't shop at Walmart, any of these stores. We probably, maybe Costco will be the only place we can shop. Maybe. But then we don't know what the supply chain is for all of Costco's products. So, like, you could get bogged down and never be able to enjoy anything that you do in life because we're a part of a system. And that's why, for me, it's like, I think we need to address the system. And I'm not saying we got to, like, do away with the system, but like what Myron said, I think we need to subvert the system, because just saying, oh, we're not going to participate, that's going to be pretty difficult. Like, we would need to get a compound and just live off the land. And who's trying to do that?
About Jesus, right? Because Jesus was not an ascetic. Ascetic means one who has a belief of going away into the desert and not participating. Jesus was involved in the city, involved in the synagogue, going to church every Sunday, but subverting the church every opportunity that Jesus had.
Mm-hmm.
He showed up every Sunday. And I think that's what we do. We show up every time we need to show up, but use our showing up as subversion and suggest there's another way to do this.
Yes. So, Tyranny, what about you? What is the church supposed to do? Greatest Commandment Theology, what do we do in this system that clearly is not working for all of society?
That's a loaded question. I don't know. I go back and forth between both extremes, right? It's like, well, we should divest from the system. We should stop supporting all of these big donors. We should shop local. But that's a class issue, right? So if you shop local for everything, if you shop farmers markets for everything, you're essentially spending more money. And if you didn't have the money to begin with, then how does that work, right? And so I mean, I don't know the answer to that question because the whole conversation is frustrating to me because we have to like live and survive in the society that we live and survive in, but also acknowledging the ways in which we're unintentionally making other people's lives less abundant, like less in line with the greatest commandment. And so for me, I don't really have an answer. It's something that I'm still struggling with, something that's still like wrecks my brain. It's kind of like a mind bender for me because it's like, well, how much of this am I participating in? How much of this am I trying intentionally not to? But is it even making a difference? And so I don't know.
That is a valid response. That is a valid response. Grayson, what about you? What are we supposed to do?
Well, I appreciate Tierney and Myron for saying I don't know, because I need to learn to reach for that answer more often, especially when I'm on screen. I have to perform. How dare I? But truly, I'm more, I can throw around big words, and I do. And I have thoughts and opinions and feelings. But to be like completely honest, I'm more so in a Tyrian or a Myronian camp. I don't know, but I do know it hasn't worked, and I bring this up a lot, and Christian remembers very well when I was bogged down in the unintended consequences and the system and participating in it, and it got to a point. Mental illness helped, but it got to a point where I felt guilty for existing.
Yeah.
I seriously felt guilty for existing, and being white didn't help with that either. I was like, thank God I'm gay. There's one part of myself that I can like at least embrace. And I don't believe that now, but yeah, like I got to a point where I was like, would it not be better for me just to die? Because if every action I take, if every product I consume, if the very fact that I'm walking this land that's stolen in a country that is, has a military presence around the world and spends most of its budget to go bomb other people, and I pay taxes to that, like, would it not be better for me just not to exist? And I don't think that's true. Myron's like, no, I'm not there anymore. That was a very low time. But I just bring that up to say,
I'm about to come to your house. I'm about to say, no, we want you to live, buddy.
Exactly, and thank you. And I think that's sort of the voice in my head. But I will say, what was I going to say? Oh, and so I think that's where grace comes in. But I think also I know that doesn't work. I know for me personally, that really doesn't work, because I wasn't living an abundant life and I wasn't able to love myself or others well because I was just a storm cloud. And I also know that I had a very profound moment at the end of my first year of seminary where I was still just like bogged down in all of this and really sad about all of this. And James Baldwin didn't help. And I remember walking the labyrinth on Mercer's campus. And a labyrinth, for those of y'all who don't know, is it's essentially like a contemplative, meaning like meditative practice where you walk a maze, for lack of a better term, that ends in a center. And that's supposed to be a very like connecting thing to God. And I was singing hymns and I sat down and then I just like heard a voice, I guess, or heard a voice from within just say, you're not responsible for this. You're responsible to this, but you wouldn't have done this if you had the choice. And that was so freeing to me that I'm not responsible for this. I didn't choose this system, but I am responsible to it. And I have choices, but I don't need to beat myself up because I wouldn't if I had had the power to choose otherwise. And that was just very freeing.
Well stated. Well stated. Because I think a lot of people deal with that. Like, to what extent am I participating in this system? Am I to blame? So on and so forth. And that's very difficult because the system is so big.
Right.
It's so massive. It's so far beyond us. Like, we can't fathom having billions of dollars. Like, that's a number. It's hard for me to even fathom what to do with all of that. I'd probably spend most of my career just giving it away, because like, how much money do you need to live an abundant life? Of course, that's a relative question, right? Because everybody has their own definition. I remember when I was in seminary and I was in my ethics class and we were talking about economics. And I felt like a lot of my classmates were really self-righteous when it came to economics. Like, they judged anybody that could afford anything they couldn't afford. Like, oh, did you see that person? They were wearing a pair of $600 shoes. That's excessive. And I'm like, well, wait a minute now, because you're saying that's excessive from your place of existence because you can't afford those shoes. But that $7 latte that you get every day is excessive to somebody who can't afford to put any shoes on their feet. Because you could just make coffee at home and give away the extra $6 every day and somebody else could wear shoes. So it's like, don't get self-righteous in your assessment of economics. So it's just, the system is so big. And as we try to navigate what it means to live out greatest commandment, the approach that I take is to teach the people who are within my sphere of influence, be generous with what you have. Be generous with what you have. Give when you can. Everybody can't, though. Like, not everybody can give money away like that, because some of us are struggling just to make ends meet for ourselves. I remember my first apartment out of college, 2007, 14 years ago. I paid $415 a month. I cannot imagine paying $415 a month just 14 years later. But guess what? Wages didn't go up. My rent went up dramatically, but wages didn't. So the system is so much bigger than us. So I just encourage everybody, be generous with what you have. If you have 50,000, be generous with that. If you have 50 million, be generous with that to whatever extent that you can. Because honestly, I just feel overwhelmed trying to assess the entire system. I can't. I'm limited in my capacity. So I'm not even going to try to unpack all of that. So just like Myron, just like Tyranny, just like Grayson, I don't know. We're just doing the best that we can. We're just doing the best that we can. Listen, this has been a phenomenal season. This has been season 4 of Holy Smokes. We're going to see if there's anything else that people want to share in the after party. But thank you to everybody who's been listening on the podcast platforms. We're coming back with season 5, and we're going to have a special episode in between the seasons. We're going to come back with Black women and African spirituality part 2 in the off season. So just join us on Patreon to be a part of that, because that's when we're going to record that one. Thank you so much for being a part of season 4. We'll see y'all in season 5 after we continue this with the Patreon community and the after party. Thank y'all so much.